Major in the majors. Don't major in the minors. Do the basics well. We have so many people that come in there wanting to try some crazy new workout routine and they haven't done the basics of strength training and they want to do something crazy. And it's like, if you just worked on the basics, you would get 85% of the needs that you really needed. Probably more than that. I think a lot of people try so hard to not do the work that all the other ancillary supplemental things that they're doing, if they would have just done the work, they would have already gotten to the place where they wanted to be.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Powerful Man Show. I am here with my special guest, Scott Johnson. Scott is not only a physical therapist, he is also a human performance coach to the stars. And probably most importantly to me, he is my go-to guy for all information regarding health and wellness. So Scott, thanks for being here, man.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited about this because a lot of the guys that we work with, guys that watch this show, you're talking about men in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s that are coming through that have been your typical, guy that's really gone after it for business and maybe has left his physical fitness to the wayside. And I know they're going to love hearing this conversation.
Yeah, awesome. Are you asking for a friend or for yourself?
Yeah, it's definitely for myself. I'm going to ask all these questions for myself. Luckily, I get to have a beer with you and ask these questions typically, but here we go. So when you think about from what you do and the average man that's out there, so picture a guy, he's got the 2.3 kids, the job, he's working his tail off, and he's woke up in the morning and realized, oh crap, I kind of let myself go. What are a couple things that guy, give me one thing that man can do today to get himself back on track?
Get a plan. Find somebody. Just to get, you got to have a plan for a business, right?
Yep.
You don't just open a business and try. I guess I kind of did, but have a plan of what you're going to go or how you want things to go. Somebody like yourself for business, right? Somebody like me, somebody just personal trainer, physical therapist, chiropractor. Just get a plan. Second is just start moving, right? You can go for a walk. We talk about that every day, right?
Yep.
Just go for a walk. I think that's the easiest way to start. It's just doing something is better than doing nothing or paralysis by analysis, right? So that's a good, just start.
What do you think are the barriers to entry for a guy? Do you think they overthink the whole process?
Sometimes underthink and just jump in, or just think they know too much. Like I used to work out in high school, or I worked out in college a little bit, but I haven't done it in a while, so I'll just jump back in. But yeah, I would say like overthinking a little bit, not having a plan, right? That's what ends up happening when you don't have a plan. So
do you think when I see a lot of guys who will all of a sudden jump back into it and they'll go back in and do the workout they did when they were in their 20s, right? And they'll go
asking for a friend, correct?
Totally for a friend. And so then they'll jump in and try the last workout or the latest workout in men's fitness they found online or something, rather than going segmentally back into their wellness program. So for a guy that's out there thinking, well, cool, I wrestled in college, now I'm 43, now I can jump back in if I want to. I know exactly what to do. What are you commonly seeing in your practice or in general when you're working with these guys?
Well, for me, injuries, right? Because I think they can go back into doing something that they haven't done in 20 years. And, well, I could do it when I was 20. It's like, well, yeah, you could do it when you were 20, but you were also doing it when you were 5, 10, 15, 20, and then you stop for the same amount of years and you try to jump back in. So I think like just trying to do too much too soon is, volume is generally, when we're talking about like, you and I talk about like strength training, CrossFit, most of the time it's volume that gets people banged up. And if you haven't been doing anything for 20 years, almost any volume is a lot, right?
Yeah.
So just go slow. That's the big thing I see is like everybody wants to not be patient, wants to have a six pack in 6 weeks.
Who wants to wait 6 weeks?
Right. A six pack last week, right? Yeah. I think just like slowing down and just taking it easy. You'll get there, one foot in front of the other, little by little, right?
Yeah, the journey is the destination, as we say.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, because I mean, it comes down to lifestyle, and obviously, you and I have talked about this a lot, and with my former life going through this. But the average guy listening to this is going to have no real idea on really fitness, nutrition, also injury prevention. And I got to imagine that a lot of the men listening to this are like, oh man, yeah, I love to go running, but my knee hurts, my ankle hurts, my shoulder hurts. Do you think a lot of guys should go see a PT or somebody before they start an exercise regime and kind of get things checked out? Or do you think they should wait until they get the bad knee or something else going on with their body and come in for a specific issue?
Both, right? Like there's no reason you can't get on a bike. That's low hanging fruit, right? Mm-hmm. You can most people can go for a walk.
Yeah.
But yeah, it depends on what situation you're in. Getting on a bike's an easy thing. If you get a gym membership, go for a walk. If you don't have a gym membership or you're adverse to doing so, right? Then getting a plan, physical therapist. There's used to be this beef between PTs and chiropractors, but I see more and more like great chiropractors, great PTs. And again, there's a bell curve in every profession, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter. There's bell curve with physicians, like everything. So I think while just getting started with the low-hanging fruit of walking and biking, get a plan, go see somebody, get cleared. Those people are generally good at figuring out how to modify, figuring out how to work around some of the injuries. Not all of them. There's a lot of people, we're not really taught in those graduate programs real fitness, that has to come from before. They're trying to get you out of pain to start. So yes, that's a good place to start. But find somebody that has like a performance background or has a history as a college athlete. That can generally be a better place to start.
Okay, so do your research basically, and obviously word of mouth is always the best.
Sure.
But if you're in this and you're in this to look at to getting back in shape, getting your body moving again, so you can play with your kids more, you can just have more energy within life, it would be smart to find a physical therapist, chiropractor, or personal strength coach.
Yeah, it's a strength coach.
Yeah, that has the background of fitness, because I think a lot of guys are surprised that most medical professionals have zero nutrition training program at all, zero exercise science at all.
Totally.
But yet the different modalities will have specific interest levels, right, of what they're designed to do.
Well, it's also really interesting that medical professionals all have a really big opinion on those things without having any like actual understanding. I mean, we could go down a huge road on this, but how much time we got? But yeah, that's generally that's the thing I see is giving recommendations from people that don't actually like have any sort of actual training, but also like being in the gym or like actually working on fitness or nutrition, and implementing that in their life. And there's something to be said about having real life experience, right? Like
in the trenches.
Yeah. I think that's why you come to me, right? It's like, yeah. I know what CrossFit movements are, and I've been in that arena. I've been strength training since I was 13. So it's interesting when you can. I see a lot of like physicians and PTs and chiropractors, shying away from like strength training because they're afraid you're going to get injured. And when you see somebody, if you're active, and they're like, well, if that hurts, don't do it. And it's like, I mean, you've been under a bar with a 1 rep max.
Oh yeah.
It ain't comfortable,
No.
It hurts. Like sometimes you fail.
Yeah.
But if you've never done that, it's hard to kind of like relate to those people. So
yeah, it's easy to do theory, right? Even if you could be a strength coach, right? Which is a high designation in the US, be a certified strength and conditioning specialist. But if you haven't been under a 400-pound, 500-pound squat, you don't know what that feels like on the body, let alone the psychology of it, right? Because to me, that's the biggest component. As soon as you get the bar on your back and you start feeling that weight, you're like, okay.
Well, that translates over to life too, right?
Yeah.
Like some hard things happen, and there's the bars on your back, and it's pulling off the grounds. I like the squat better than like a deadlift, just because you don't have to pull the deadlift. Squat's on your bar or on your back. It's either going up or it's not.
Yeah.
And we've all been on the bottom of that, right?
Sit down, stand up.
Yep.
So again, I'm picturing this guy sitting at home without any fitness background, because he decided to study something different than you and I did in school, and somebody's he's woke up, he's looking in the mirror. Things with his wife may not be as good as they could be, and he just wants to get sexy back, right? And so, I mean, everybody wants to look better naked, you know. I mean, who doesn't? So, what are some? Obviously, we want to get him a plan, right? We want to keep him injury free. How would you suggest he does that? At what point would he come? Would you say, "Hey, Doug, come see me when X"? In other words, when you start hurting or when it becomes unbearable or the first sign of pain. And I know that's a hard question to answer, but to the best of your ability, when would you come start seeing a professional like yourself?
Yeah, again, like it depends. You know, if you have a coach already, so what I see a lot from my practice as a physical therapist, not necessarily as like strength and conditioning. Physical therapy, I tend to see people that wait too long. You know, I've heard from people in the past, physical therapy just like takes too long. You know, it's like, well, yeah, but because you've been in pain for 6 months, and I can't reverse this 6-month issue in one session. Sometimes you can, sometimes you get lucky, or sometimes, for instance, I had a guy he only had pain when he was back squatting over 315. Sweet, let's watch a back squat. No pain, no pain, no pain. And I noticed something when he was at like 135, right? Never stood his squat up all the way and was not bracing at all. So he gets to 315, and just imagine being in a little hinge position with 315 on your back. And it's like, why don't you just stand all the way up?
Yeah.
Oh, it doesn't hurt. There we go. That wasn't, I got lucky. But sometimes people have chronic pain. There's so much to pain, you know? But if you're somebody that's just like looking for a plan, like that's what I would say, like just when you're ready to make the jump. I would say not when you're ready to dabble. Yeah, I mean, when you're ready to dabble, we can, but it's one of those things like my mentor said something to me. He's like, get the fence post out of your ass. And I was like, what does he mean? He's like, just pick a side. Either you want to do something or you don't. If that's something you're going to make a commitment on, then do it, right?
Yep.
Like make the commitment. And once you're ready to make the commitment, get somebody. Grab a strength coach, a PT, a chiropractor, strength, like for that maybe modality or that activity you want to do. And it's sort of the same thing with being injured. I think it's like the sooner you can get into somebody that's trying to do the same thing that you're wanting to do, right? The sooner the better. You'll have less visits. You'll have less time. You'll have a better understanding, you know, if you get somebody that's good. Better understanding of what your condition is or how you can not be in that condition in the future. So,
Well, basically, you're buying time, right? And so the men listening to this all know this cognitively, that the limited resource they have is time.
Totally.
And by getting an expert, whether it be a strength coach, PT, personal trainer, joining CrossFit, whatever it is,
Sure.
You're really buying your time back. It's the same thing. Being on the fence is something we talk about a lot because men that watch this show on YouTube or listen to it on whatever station they want to listen it to are often on the fence about joining the program that we offer, which is called the activation method.
Yeah.
And because they want their marriage to be ignited, they want more passion in their relationship, that they're like, I don't know. And so guys, for some reason, don't get as well as women, because women tend to jump in a lot quicker. They're like, I have a problem. I need a solution. Let's go find it.
Totally.
Men tend to be on the fence more and more. And then
try to fix the solution or make the solution, right?
Yeah. Fix the problem, get the solution. And that's interesting that they see it in fitness as well. And also injury. I'm sure you see this with injury prevention a lot with compliance and things like that.
Women are much more compliant. They're in general, and we're talking in generalities here,
Of course.
right?
Yeah.
Women are generally the ones that, gosh, I have to think about my patient population right now. I'd say 70% females from, the age of 20 to, I think Betty's my oldest at 94.
Yeah.
And
Go Betty.
Betty gets after it. She still deadlifts. She lives on her own. She's doing great. She still does burpees.
Yeah.
Because she falls, she's got to get up off the ground,
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting. Men, I think part of it is because we all think we've got the answers, right? And so I think sometimes it's hard to ask for help. It can be a sign of weakness, right? Or a sign of like incompetence, and we don't want to be that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think that, men we have a bit of a hard time getting there before we need to, right? What your original question is what?
So I don't know if it was a question, but more of long lines of not just compliance, but when people want to get on the fence. You said you started off with talking about your old mentor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think that we were talking a little bit about buying time, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting for somebody that's so smart and has such a, wanting to do that. Like, we're creating businesses to buy ourselves time, right? Or to create some, for whatever reason it is. But ultimately, time's the thing we want, or we need, or we're trying to get back. And we build this great business and we don't have any health at the end of the day, So it's interesting that I see so many men that, especially are wealthy or well-to-do, they're so unfit and so unhealthy. And it's like, you've done so well in another part of your life. And it's like, now you only have 10 years to enjoy this. And it's not even really enjoyable because you're, something I talk about is like living at a 1 rep max as these people get a little bit older, and I see it in like 65-year-olds, guys having a hard time getting out of a chair, and not as much in the community we live in, right? It's a pretty active community, but it happens quickly when you lose strength, 1% a year. Those studies are not necessarily with people who strength train, but that happens a lot faster than you think. So yeah. Does that kind of answer the question?
It gives us a good idea. So we talked about one thing people could do is get a plan, right? So let's just say I got a plan. Obviously, I got to take action on that plan and get follow up. What are some other things that men can do to, one, optimize their performance, and two, prevent themselves from having to get injured? Like, what are a couple of things that you've seen that guys can do today or in the coming weeks to really change things around?
Strength training, right? I think that's, you and I talk about it, we know about it, but I think the general public, I think 24% of people don't, or are only 24% of the people in the US meet the minimum strength training requirements by the government, or what the government puts out there, which is pretty low. I think we all talk about, like, we know strength training is great. You have to do it. It's beneficial for so many things, but actually implementing that and having that be a thing that is a part of your life and part of your fitness routine, I don't think people really do it. So I would say number one, like, strength training. And I don't know if there's a number two. I think strength training through full ranges of motion and actually getting after it a little bit. I think that is the number one thing. I don't think there's a close number two. I really don't.
Yeah, it's interesting because so my former life being in the fitness industry, I have a lot of friends that are still in there, like yourself. And there are a couple guys out there who I really respect who have the initials after their last name, who are now saying don't go through a full range of motion, that there's actually no proven benefit, and it's more, the risk reward just isn't there. Like for a squat, they'll go to parallel, not below parallel. Obviously, you've heard, obviously shoulder impingement with the bench press. Sure. You look at the classic moves. What are your thoughts on that based on the people that you're seeing?
Well, I will say if you look at a biomechanical model, that's not true. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you look at the shear force on the lumbar spine when you squat, if you can get full depth in a squat, you should do it because the shear force on the lumbar spine is better. There's this thing called the wrapping effect on the knee. So if when you how we used to be taught, like 90 degrees, you stop.
Oh yeah.
That's actually
for lunges.
Right. Yeah. Right. That's actually the highest area of patellofemoral pressure, or like the kneecap on the femur. So as you go lower, there's this thing called the wrapping effect. So the connective tissue, the retinaculum, kind of actually holds. It kind of displaces the force a little bit. So I think that's like maybe like more of a perceived threat than an actual threat. And it depends, right? Like if you have an arthritic knee, then maybe you shouldn't do that. You should go for where you are. If you have patellar tendonitis or something, just for instance of the knee, that very end range is probably going to be a little bit painful. But for general people, like you should definitely go through full range of motion.
What do you think about, I'm going to switch gears a little bit, but similar vein. And I have two questions here. But first, I'll start off with, what do you think about, so when I had my practice, we did a lot of functional assessments, movement assessments. How do you think most people, before they get under a bar or things of that nature, should be doing some kind of assessment to see, is your knee tracking, what's your QAing, all those kinds of fun things to figure out, hey, should you be under the bar in your squat, or do you need to work on, flexibility first? Or
Yeah, totally. And like, did you do the FMS?
I did FMS, yeah.
And that's a great
one of the models.
Yeah, it's a great tool. I personally like to do just like a hands-on. I don't know how much hands-on you were doing with clients back then. I think there's a
lot.
Is there? Okay. I think that there's like a little bit of it's a little bit frowned upon now for coaches and trainers to be touching. I think there's actually like legality issues, but
it wasn't when I was doing it.
Yeah, totally. But for me, like, I like to get my hands on a patient to actually see, is like, okay, well, is it soft tissue that's restricting it? Is it like motor control? Is it strength? There's a lot of things that can limit that. So yeah, I do think you should go through some sort of screening process from somebody that's qualified. I see it all the time with people. I mean, we've all been there, right? Somebody's like tries to do air squat and they can't get very deep. They're like, but if you put some weight on my back, I can get down there. So it's like, well, yeah, you actually have the mobility to get to that position. You just don't have the motor control to get to that position. So that's all good information to know before you start getting on a program, right? You're not, how do you, and that goes back to like us talking about getting a coach or professional to help get you a plan, right? Because if you don't know what the problem is, you can't, or where your weakness is, you can't kind of like tailor the program to that.
Yeah, I think that would be a key indicator. If someone were to ask me, how do I find a professional to write me a program? And if you've been out of the fitness field for a while, what I mean by that is if you haven't been active for a while,
sure,
and you need find someone who's going to give you an assessment. And
totally.
CrossFit, you mentioned CrossFit, you do CrossFit, I do CrossFit.
Right.
And I've been to several different CrossFit gyms. And, there's a difference between one that you bring in, they assess you to make sure that, hey, your risk of injury is going to be lower. Also good sales technique too, right? Of course. And,
totally.
but I, you can see through it, but I appreciate it versus another one that I've been to was basically like, okay, let's go. You're like, we're doing snatches today. You're like, really? I got shoulder impingement, all kinds of things. But
yeah, good sales tech. It's good sales, but also
no, it's the right thing to do.
It's the right thing to do.
100%.
Like,
that's my point.
Yeah, totally. It's like,
or a personal trainer should be assessing.
Should be, yeah.
Their clients. They shouldn't just be putting them on, weights or machines or whatever else.
Yeah, and I think that should like kind of guide for me like treatment and like practice. I almost always start clients, whether it be like strength and conditioning or performance or like just traditional PT. Mm-hmm. We always try to do like functional movements. They're all kind of functional, right?
Yeah.
Some are more functional than others. But like I always try to have somebody do a squat, hinge, and some sort of pressing and try to figure that out. But like for the squat we always start with like squatting to a target. How's that look? Looks good? Good. Can you do it consistently? Great. Now let's bump up the intensity, right? Generally use a kettlebell. Kettlebell can clean up a lot of things, that once you put a barbell on somebody's back, it changes, right? Mm-hmm. You've been there.
Sure.
It changes it. So I think so this might even go back to before, like if you don't know what to do, obviously getting a plan is the best part, but if you're not, you're still on the fence, you still got that up there, the fence post, take a kettlebell, do a goblet squat. That most people can figure out how to do a goblet squat fairly well. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's a lot of my assessment and kind of the way I go.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess for the average guy listening to this right now, I think the key takeaway that I want them to have is if you're going to go to the gym, you're going to get a trainer or a plan, or you're going to see your local physical therapist to get a plan or whoever it may be.
Yeah.
Make sure they're assessing you first. Otherwise, you're just getting a cookie cutter plan, right? And
totally.
That's a red flag. Another red flag that I would say is if you go hire a personal trainer, maybe at Equinox or wherever,
Sure.
and they just put you on machines straight away, also not a good sign. Another red flag
Yeah.
that I'd be looking for. And these are just things that I know a lot of the men, because if you don't know, you don't know, right? You
Totally.
and I've been doing this for a long time. But these are things I see all the time. Just because your trainer's good looking and fit
Or fit, yeah.
doesn't mean that they know how to get you fit.
Yeah. I mean, you know, and I know to get a six pack, doesn't matter how much you do. And like, it's
Sadly.
it sucks, but it is what it is. Like,
You can't be drinking a six pack every night.
can't be drinking a six pack.
Darn it.
Right. Yeah. And I think that also has to go with like a plan, right? Having a plan that'll give you a plan. And asking, as the men that like maybe watching the show or somebody trying to get back into this, it's really a good idea to like have a plan of like what you are actually wanting to do. So if somebody comes in and makes an appointment with me in my practice, I'm assuming they have pain. So they're wanting to be out of pain and there's something that's being taken away that they can't do. So for me, I'm like, I don't know that until you tell me that. I'm going to ask you questions. So if this is a performance thing and like you have a goal or if it's just like you want to look good, that's something you got to tell people too. So I think like a communication part is like, yeah, getting a plan's great, but if you don't know where you want to go, and that's where a professional will help you, guide you, but most people kind of know what they want, right?
I think they do. I think some people are scared to communicate it, you know?
Sure.
There's some people that are going to want performance. There's some guys that still just want to be stronger, you know, and you look at the hierarchy, like, do you want a six pack or do you want to be able to bench 300? Like, where do you want? Like, well, I want to bench first. Okay. Well, we don't have to, we're going to adjust your macronutrients differently.
Not going to have that six pack probably.
Not right away anyway.
Yeah, you'll get there, but
yeah, we're going to increase your strength, right? Which requires more fuel, which are calories.
totally.
Yeah. You want to be in surplus.
I've got a strength.
That's what I'm working on.
Dirty bulking, right?
Yeah.
I got a buddy that's a strength coach up in Montana, and I really love his program. He keeps things simple, but every male he has, he's like, they're gonna get buys and tries, even if they don't tell me, because name a guy that doesn't want bigger buys and tries.
Yeah.
And every woman, they always have some sort of like butt exercise and some abs.
I did the same thing in my practice.
Yeah, and he's like,
just chest and tries.
chest and tries, right? Yeah. So it's funny, even though there are some things like you don't have to tell me you want it. I already know you're gonna want it.
Yeah.
So
Well, it was progression. So it was a secret that, well, not much of a secret, I guess. But so I had a private fitness studio in Santa Barbara, like a very high end one where we had some great trainers. And one of the things you always knew that you bring somebody in, if they didn't have basic core strength, right? They couldn't do a plank for 10 seconds. You still, if it was a woman, you still had to have them leave with a sore butt or sore abs,
Right.
Even if it wasn't the right thing for them. And then if it was a guy, I had to have their chest sore or their biceps or their arms,
Right.
had to be sore.
had to have a pump.
They had to feel it like, wow, the next morning my chest is super sore.
Yeah.
And the thing I used to teach when I taught this was you got to give them what they want so you can give them what they need.
Totally.
Right. So coming back to it, you came here to the TPM Ranch when we had an event. We had some of the men from the Inner Circle, which is one of our higher end mastermind groups that guys go into after they go through our base program. And you put the guys through the paces, through a series of assessments that the guys could take home. And one of the things that you talked about, which I found really interesting, and you and I had talked about this prior, is the correlation of, I think it was life expectancy to VO2 max. Is that what it was?
Yeah, I think there's there's a couple markers of that, but yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that, or even in generalization, so guys can understand? Talk like you're talking to me, like to a 10-year-old.
I mean, VO2 max is just like the maximum amount of oxygen you can consume, right? It's VO2
Uptake
max.
and utilize,
Yeah. And it's been a while since I've taken an exercise phys course, so some things may have changed, but generally the amount of oxygen you can take in generally means you're exercising and you're healthy and fit. But I think some of those things are also changing. I think there's more correlations with, like, if you look at grip strength too, right? There's life expectancy for grip strength. So that's something that's, I sort of look at like all those things. You know, VO2 max is great. And we see those a lot in like, how do you get a higher VO2 max? generally running, right?
Yeah,
Like
moving.
yeah,
Move your body.
move your body for over a long distance quicker. And the quicker you can do it, and the longer you can do it, the higher your VO2 max is.
Yep.
But like again, it's going to go back to strength training as well. I think that's a big thing that's not talked enough about is like grip strength. You know, and I know grip strength. You can just be working on grip strength, and that's not going to make you.
Well, that's corollary.
It's corollary, right? Like, but that goes in. That's why I had the guys. What we do? We did some pull-ups, right?
Yep.
I think we did some farmers carries as well.
Yep, we did them in stations, so we did it in tandem with a partner.
Yep. So things like that. That's just gonna. You see, my grandpa was a farmer. He lived in '94.
Yeah.
When he stopped farming, he died.
Yeah.
Really, was his VO2 max high? I can't imagine. He smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day since he was 12. So I'm not condoning smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day, but I think that's one metric to use to kind of look at fitness and how you're going to live a little bit longer, a little bit healthier life. But you can't. We cannot take away from the strength metrics. Those are going to be a bigger, in my opinion, at least for vitality of life, right? You might not live as long with VO2 as a VO2 marker, but like if you fall, you're not going to break your hip. The likelihood of falling is probably not quite as high either, right? If you have the strength. So those two things I think they don't go hand in hand. They're kind of inverse, right? A lot of times. So I think having both, it's or, right? It's both those things need to be as high as possible. So that's why I kind of challenged the guys at the retreat, let's see where you are on all those things. And I think some people performed pretty well. Some people did not, and some people performed really well on things I didn't think they were going to, you know? And, it's funny. I don't think we can talk about those two things without like talking about how to get there. And I think a lot of it's just like really just doing the work, right? A little bit of grit, a little bit, there's some guys that wanted to quit. And I think pushing each other, they were able to dig a little bit deeper. And I think that's a good reason to have a strength coach or even a workout buddy, or, that's why you and I go to CrossFit, right?
Yeah.
You dig a little bit deeper. If there's somebody standing next to you, that's just human nature.
Oh, it is. Gosh, there's not a CrossFit workout I wouldn't walk out on. Or I definitely wouldn't have pushed it to the level I would have because, I got to answer this guy or this person's calling me on my phone. So it's excuses, right? But you're there and you're in the environment. Like when we had the guys here at the ranch, there was definitely at least one guy I can think of, and probably the same person you're thinking of, that I think that person would have walked away right away with some of the exercises, and he pushed through.
Totally.
Right. And he went to the darker spaces in his mentality and his psyche, and he came out the other side a better and stronger man. Yeah.
I think that's great for even for him to see, like, after we came back, I'm sure we're talking about the same person. He did say, he's like, thanks for giving me that push, and sometimes you need a little bit of a push, and sometimes really to make change, right? We need a space that's uncomfortable, whether that be like relationship wise or business, that's like when the magic happens. That's no different in fitness. I mean, that is the challenging part, is where change really is where it really happens. So
agreed. So I'm going to go into some specific questions. Because I'm thinking, the two main goals that we know the guys are going to want to have that are listening to this is one, longevity. They want to live a longer and more fruitful life. Want to be able to play with their kids, well into their 80s and 90s if they can. The second thing is they want to look better so they can have, be more attractive, so they have more sex. Right, two common goals that guys have.
Good goals.
Those are great goals. They're kind of goals we all have.
Right.
And so we've talked about obviously getting a plan. One thing we haven't talked about, which you and I know is paramount, and I know you're incorporating this into the plan idea, but it's also the hardest subject to talk about around this, is nutrition, right? So from what you do, because you have a unique perspective in my eyes. One is you're a physical therapist, but two is, you're also deeply steeped in the fitness industry as well. What have you seen success with the most commonly? In other words, is there a particular diet, macronutrient profile, or should people is it really calories in, calories out at the end of the day?
Oh gosh.
Want to corner you right there.
Yeah, right there. I think the biggest thing is like tracking. Tracking and hitting some protein goals or finding some macro goals, and just also like biting up, no pun intended, biting off a little bit at a time, right? If you're have absolutely no idea what you're doing, a complete change, right? It's not going to last very long. What, 6 weeks? Maybe.
Yeah.
Like that's being generous, probably.
Yeah.
Some people they'll get into it, but I would say like I think it's a law of thermodynamics, right? Like,
Yep. Calories in, calories out.
Yep. I think that's important, but also I think tracking is probably the biggest issue is most people don't know what they're actually eating. So I think finding I really like, I think we've talked about like Renaissance periodization, the RP. I talked to a couple of the guys, the RP diet. That's the only one I really have personal experience with. I know Carbon Coach by Lane Norton.
Not sure what the name is.
Lane Norton?
Yeah.
Yep. I think he's got a company called Carbon Diet as well, or like an app called that. I like using that just because for me, it gives me some accountability. And a lot of times I'll look at something that I think is, 20 grams of protein. And I'm like, that's a lot of cottage cheese, or, just having an idea of what it actually is. And I think most people don't really know. So number one, I think for nutrition is really track it. Even if it's for a week, I think people will be, kind of surprised when they look at what they're eating and they think they're eating 1,200 calories and they're eating 3,200 calories.
Yep. Or drinking it.
Right? Like there are calories in alcoholic beverages or pop or like
orange
milk
juice in the morning.
Yeah, that all those things have calories. The creamer in your coffee, right? I think that's probably the most important. I read something the other day. Was it the average American? What they think they eat, right, is like 1,800 calories or 2,000. But the average American's consuming 2,500 calories. That's a lot of calories,
Yep.
right? That's more than
the average American needs.
We probably about 220, right? 210, 215, 220 to that be like your basal, like your BMR. It's probably around there.
It's been,
You gotta be a heavier guy.
Yeah.
Or gal to consume that much and not gain any weight or training very hard.
Yeah.
So that goes to calories in, calories out. That's my opinion, and I think that's basic physiology. There's other things also, but I think major in the majors and control the controllables, right? Like you can control how much you put in your mouth. You can control how much you expend for the most part. And then hitting a protein, I like to say like hit your body weight, like per gram, right? Yep. Just start there. You can up and down from that. But I go back to that RP diet and the RP app just because it's really simple. It's really, really, really easy. I talked to a couple guys about it. I think one of them downloaded it and he was starting to use it, but it's great. They have an app for hypertrophy, so you can add some mass if you want to just like be in the performance or if you want to lose weight. And they automatically, it's an AI generated app, but it's great. Everybody I've known that actually sticks to it loses weight.
There you go. Yeah, it's funny. I'm thinking back when I used to be in that field, and
it was way harder then.
Well, it was way harder then. You still had it. MyFitnessPal was around, but that was like pretty much the only player, and it was not as robust. But you had it. But what I would do is for 1 week, I'd have every client write down their food log, and there was not one person who was honest with me.
Right?
And you get to know people, and people that actually knew their unconscious snacking. That was the most common thing that I would see, or oh crap, I always got a large mocha at Starbucks or whatever else it was. I didn't realize that had, I don't know the calories, so no one from Starbucks sue me. I didn't realize that had 1,200 calories
Right.
in that cup alone, which could be their daily caloric, amount.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so it was always interesting to me, and it was a big eye turner. Because what I would say, Scott, is the common question to the interview, like, so let's talk about your diet. Not what you've had today, but what you have 2 days ago.
Right.
Because what they had today was clean, right?
Oh, yeah, they're coming to see you. Yeah.
or even in their imagination. But
Sure.
2 days ago, and every time, I shouldn't say every time, 9 times out of 10, the response I would get is, well, that day was an anomaly. And it could, right? It could be on a Wednesday I talked to someone, and Thursday I would talk to someone. It was always, well, that day you're asking me to record, that's an anomaly.
Sure.
And when
What,
they
what
started,
did you say to yourself when they said that to you?
what?
What were you saying to
I
yourself?
just
when they
laughed because I knew it was coming, right? I mean, I've done thousands of these at this point,
Right.
And so it was just like I could predict the answers and responses I was getting for everybody.
Totally.
But you have to act like it's new,
Right.
And surprising, like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
I know it was an anomaly, but still, let's just write it down.
Yeah. Let's just see.
Let's walk me through it.
Yeah.
Oh well, I had pancakes with syrup, and then it was just a weird time.
Would you have them like measure, like
No.
weight or
No.
How'd you have them?
No. So eventually, when I had them do the week, I just had them write down their food. So anytime you put something in your mouth, except for water, you have to write it down. Coffee.
Oh, okay.
Just write it in a log, and
Just to be aware of.
just to be aware of it, yeah, and just consciously. So, as an example, there's a woman I worked with, amazing woman. For some reason, she wasn't losing weight. She was just like, Doug, I'm sticking to the meal plan that you gave me, and like I'm sticking to the things. And I go, wow, I just can't figure this out. And then I had her keep a log, and she came back and she looked at me like sheepishly, and I'm like, what happened? She's like, I didn't realize that every time I walk by my kitchen, I grab a cookie. I just subconsciously, she's like, I had 7 cookies. Right. And that was when she was starting to write things down. So how many cookies did she have on an average day when she wasn't even catching herself?
Yeah.
It's just a common thing. And people don't realize, whether it be a handful of nuts, snacks at the secretary's desk, or like I said, a lot I saw with lattes, coffee drinks that are really just desserts disguised as caffeine.
Well, it's even like, it's interesting that you say like the things that you drink. Cause I think I just knew that there were calories in beer.
Yeah.
I just didn't care, you know? But I had same story, like somebody's not losing any weight, and I'm like, actually, your diet looks pretty good, right? And then we dig in, and he's like, well, I have a couple whiskeys, and it's like, well, you got to write that down too.
Leave me alone.
The story is about Doug.
No, yeah. I mean, this happens a lot too. As another example, I have a client that I was working with one-on-one, and he would leave me messages, and sometimes he'd be a little intoxicated. And while I'm working with him on his relationship, I'm also, because of my background, I'm like, okay, I'll help you out with losing a few pounds, no problem. And so I talked to him the next day. I'm like, hey, how was dinner? What'd you have? No, I had the chicken piccata and a glass of wine. I'm like, dude, don't lie to me. I know you had a glass of wine. How many glasses, and what'd you have before and after that? Oh, well, I had 3 gin and tonics, 4 glasses of wine, a couple beers. You're like, all right, man. I think we have identified the weight challenge problem here.
Right. Yeah. That you drank your day's allotment of calories.
Yeah, it was your choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe tomorrow's calories, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's not, well, and plus, your body can't process fat as easily when you have alcohol in the system.
Totally.
It just can't uptake and utilize those calories as readily. So I'm going to change subjects away from nutrition.
Okay.
And go into rehabilitation.
Okay.
Right. So, and the reason I want to do this is, one is, as you know, I've gone in and out of fitness quite a bit in the last, since my kids were born. So 7 years or so. And when I go back to the old dogmas that I taught when I was back in that field, foam rolling, stretching, mobility, which one of those are beneficial for somebody, and which one of those have kind of been thrown off?
Oh man, foam rolling, stretching. Static stretching, I think
That's what I'm using as stretching. Sorry.
Yeah, I think static stretching is probably the one, but they all have their, I'll give you what I give anytime I have a student. It depends. Yeah. It just depends, right?
Yeah.
Like, depends on what you're trying to do. If somebody's, foam roller is great for like thoracic mobility. If you have somebody has an issue with their spine, or like staying upright with a squat, or pressing overhead, you have to have full thoracic extension to get your shoulder over your head. So it just depends on what you're looking for. But I would say static stretching is it's kind of gone by the wayside.
So you want-
Yeah, I mean, so many people still do it. I'll go to a CrossFit class and I'm like, this is very antiquated. We know this isn't.
Which is interesting because there's an app, it used to be called ROMWAD for CrossFitters. You familiar with it? It's called Pliability now. I'm not going to talk trash about them. But whenever I load that app up, it is mostly 3 to 4 minute holds, which I think is like yin yoga effectively, which I found very interesting. I was really surprised at that. I was just surprised. I was surprised it wasn't more mobility.
Well, so what's mobility mean to you? Because I think I have a different definition than what most people talk about when they
That's fair.
say mobility.
So I would say dynamic stretching would be a mobility to animal flow type movements. So for those that aren't familiar with that, could be like shin box,
Sure.
going through something along those lines. I'm trying to think of how to describe this so someone listening can understand. But animal flow would be more hands and knees crawling and moving into interesting positions that I think the average guy couldn't do.
Okay.
Just to warm the body
Okay.
up.
Yeah.
So basically what I'm saying with mobility is you are taking your body through end ranges of motion in motion.
So like a full motion squat.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for me, it all depends. That's where it does kind of depend.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I think like full range of motion exercises is really important if you have the capacity to do so.
Yep.
So when I think about mobility, I think a lot of people think, well, I don't have that motion, so I need to stretch. Well, this is where we can kind of circle around, right?
Yeah.
This is why having somebody actually do an assessment of you is super important, right? Mm-hmm. So if I can lay you on the table, take your arm, and put it over your head, you don't have a range of motion problem. So stretching isn't really that fruitful, correct?
Yep.
You already have the joint has the full capacity. Your tissue has the full capacity to get you there. But you probably don't have the motor control, and that's where I would think more mobility is what you think. Some people are just tight, and they just need to spend some more time in positions, and that might be where it's like, I use squat a lot because I think that's something that most people are familiar with.
Yep.
Excuse me. Squat therapy. Have you ever heard of squat therapy?
No.
No? You haven't met, how long have you done CrossFit?
I've been doing CrossFit since I moved here. That's when I started doing it. So, because it's the only real gym in town. So it's been 2 years.
Oh, okay. For some reason, I thought you were doing CrossFit for like 8.
No, I did it before because a buddy of mine had one. I wanted to get out. When I had my gym in Santa Barbara, I had a fitness magazine. So I kind of was known in the area. So I wanted to go someplace different.
Oh, okay.
And I did CrossFit there briefly.
Okay. So squat therapy, you've seen people where they put a medicine ball down to the ground and they use like a target. A lot of times they'll put you up against the wall and then try to squat down without obviously falling backwards. So a lot of times I'll use that. So if I go with somebody and their hips and knees all have full range of motion, but they can't do a full depth squat, that's sort of like some of the prehab I'll do for them or have them do. Some muscle activation stuff as well. So, but some eccentric lowering down, hold that position. So it's just another way to get to like the kind of primal movements that you're kind of speaking of.
Okay. So you're not throwing out foam rolling, kind of tossing out static stretching a little bit.
Depends.
But kind of tossing it out.
Kind of tossing it out, yeah.
And
maybe as a cool down.
Yeah.
As a cool down, part of that's also like, what are you doing with a static stretch? You're kind of like milking the parasympathetic nervous system, right? Mm-hmm. When's a better time to do that than after you're done working out?
You're also warm too,
And you're
right?
warm.
So you're most pliable.
Right. So I would say not necessarily. Not necessarily throwing it out, but throwing it out as a warm up to go exercise.
Got it.
But foam rolling's a good way to kind of loosen up some mobility work. Have you heard of cars?
Yep.
Okay, so something like that.
Describe cars to the people listening to this in audio.
So it's just sort of like what you were talking about. What is it? Continuous articular motion. I don't do a lot of them. I mean,
Rotation or something.
yeah, you've been in this long enough. The same thing we called something 10 years ago. Somebody's repackaged it and have some sexy name that makes people want to buy it now.
Sure.
So it's basically end range of motion work.
Yeah. In a circular fashion,
in a
right?
circular
You're
fashion.
rotating over a hinged joint.
Yep, generally.
Yeah.
So, and you can do the same thing with, I will do that more in a different, I spend more time with just people at end range. It doesn't have to necessarily be in a a rotary motion. I think most people think about cars as like hip and shoulder, right?
Yeah.
Because those are ball and socket joint, and they can do that. Yeah. But for like shoulder, I'll do like end range of motion work up on a wall, maybe. But yeah.
Okay. Well, and wrapping this all up and trying to get back to, let's think of the average person listening to this, if they're still listening to this right now, for us two talking about it,
Right.
Is, hey, I want to get back into working out. You guys already told me, get a plan, find somebody that's trusted. I think we said verbal recommendation, always the best, right? Personal recommendation from somebody that's had a good experience. To look at someone who's going to assess you if possible. You can do online workouts as well. Just do something. Second, we talked about writing down your food, making sure you get a food log. And third, we've talked about also finding a professional, when you get injured early to help keep you on track.
Totally.
Anything else that you'd recommend that these guys do?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that question. Major in the majors. Don't major in the minors. Do the basics well, right? Like, I have so many people that come in there wanting to try some crazy new workout routine, and they cannot do an air squat. They haven't done the basics of strength training. They are not like even walking or running, and they want to box jump and do something crazy. And it's like, if you just worked on the basics, you would get 85% of the needs that you really needed. Probably more than that, basics of nutrition. That's what's most important, and I'm not gonna, when I say minor in the minors, I see, I guess out west, I don't know. I haven't been out or back east or Midwest or South recently, but like cold plunging's a big thing, right? I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. But if you're using that to be 3% healthy, healthier, why wouldn't you use something like strength training, sleeping, managing your stress, healthy nutrition? Don't drink so much. Those are going to give you like 95% of the value, what you're really, really looking for. I think a lot of people try so hard to not do the work that all the other ancillary supplemental things that they're doing, if they would have just done the work, they would have already gotten to the place where they wanted to be.
Yep. Don't get caught in the details.
Right.
Yeah. Do the basics. I love it. Yeah, I see that all the time. That's such great information. Scott, if somebody wants to learn more about you and your practice or wants to follow up with you, what's the best way for them to do so?
I'm not really active on Instagram. I have an Instagram. It's PT Nomad, like physical therapist. And I own a practice here in Central Oregon, Physio Fitness Solutions. They can email me at scott@physiofitben.com. Or they can give us a call, or they can reach out to you.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being here, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, guys, that's a wrap for us here at the Powerful Man Show. As always, in the moment of insight, take massive action. And if you're not listening to this while you're moving, get off your butts and go do something now. We'll see you next time on the Powerful Man Show.